Call to the world. Millions of people are starving and your help is needed. We examine the alarm at the United Nations. Also today, the air that I breathe. Sometimes it just might kill you. We examine the pollutants at large in European cities. I'm Martin Stanford. This is Insight. Hello, welcome to Insight. 20 million people are facing the threat of starvation across countries in Africa and Yemen. The United Nations is raising the alarm about a famine now in 2017 in Yemen and a similar lack of food in Somalia, South Sudan and Nigeria. And it's asking the world for $4.5 billion by July to help avoid what it calls a catastrophe. UNICEF has already warned 1.4 million children could starve to death this year. Insight's Dana Lewis reports.
Severe hunger pains in Africa. In South Sudan, up to 5 million people, that's half the population, are in urgent need of food. In a place known as Thonyor, these families have waded through waist-high water for hours to get to a World Food Program distribution point.
We don't have enough food. We are in the war.
They are caught in the crossfire in South Sudan's civil war. At night, they hide in nearby swamps where they eat what they can find. This woman is the mother of 9 children. A meal is usually made from what grows in the swamps.
We have no food, and the entire family depends on water lily and date palm.
Aid agencies must carefully navigate South Sudan's war zone. Most food is flown in because the roads are unsafe. We spoke to an Oxfam aid worker in South Sudan who says it's time the international community did more.
It has been extremely frustrating being inside South Sudan and seeing what we are seeing, and the international community impotent.
The scale of suffering in the region and its rapid spread is frightening. Oxfam is warning the world. 4 looming famines add up to a staggering 20 million people now at risk of starvation. In addition to South Sudan, there is Nigeria. The government has declared victory over the jihadist Boko Haram. The country's northeast needs rebuilding. Farms have been abandoned. Travel is dangerous. Up to 7 million people risk starvation in the surrounding Lake Chad region. Somalia and other parts of the Horn of Africa are suffering a disastrous drought, threatening millions more. The number of malnourished children is in the hundreds of thousands. And again, conflict within Somalia makes the movement of aid dangerous and slow. And then across the Red Sea to the Arabian Peninsula, there is Yemen, another civil war. There is food, but no way to move it to millions of increasingly sick and hungry. Near Oxford, England, where Oxfam is based, they ship mostly equipment to purify water. And because so much of Africa's looming hunger is the result of war, it has to be portable.
So you could go and fill them up from any water source, whether it be standing water or a river or stream, whatever.
Oxfam has used some unprecedented language to describe the urgency needed to deal with these 4 famines. They've called it a catastrophic failure of the global community to protect some of the world's most vulnerable.
The tragedy is everybody, not just aid agencies, but the governments of the world said after we had this in Somalia in 2010 and 11, i.e. we had avoidable famine because we were slow to act, people said they would never do it again. And the tragedy is that the world is allowing it to happen again.
So it's really a call to action.
Absolutely. It's a call to action, and it's a call to urgent action. It's to stump up the money for the urgent aid in the next few weeks, not months.
And the UN Secretary General said during his recent tour of Somalia, not dealing with hunger and its destabilizing effects is a root cause of terrorism.
To let countries like Somalia perish and to let the people like the Somali people suffer the dramatic impact of the combination of drought, conflict and disease is a danger for everybody.
Why does this happen over and over again? The driver is conflict. It used to be that famines occurred every decade or so. Famine occurred in Ethiopia in the mid-80s, Somalia in 1991, and Somalia again 10 years later. But the charity supergroup known as Band-Aid didn't quite get it right as they raise millions for relief. The lyrics that Africa is a place where nothing ever grows, no rain nor rivers flows, wasn't accurate. There have been inroads in agriculture and water use. And while it's true global warming has increased the frequency of droughts, the real problem remains political instability.
It's obviously the weather, but the weather itself does not make a famine. The famine is made by not being able to respond to the weather. And in some cases, that's because people in power or people fighting for power don't let the resources and the information siphon down to the people who need it. So it really is up to us to help them, because otherwise this is just going to end in probably the worst mass devastation that we've ever seen.
The 4 areas of potential famine could soon become 5. Drought doesn't respect borders. In northern Kenya, several million people are at risk because of years without rain. Cattle are dying. And once again, because of conflict in that area, relief is dangerously slow, outpaced by hunger. I'm Dana Lewis reporting for Insight.
Well, to discuss that further, I'm joined by Greg Barrow, who is the UK spokesman for the World Food Programme. Greg, it's a very pessimistic outlook, isn't it? You're feeding people in Yemen already, but you need to do more. What are the stumbling blocks? Why cannot you do more?
Well, let's consider what kind of a country Yemen is. It's a country that needs to import almost all of its food needs at the very best of times. And now it's going through the worst of times. We're into the 2nd year of conflict. We, as an agency, the World Food Programme responding, have to bring in huge amounts of food assistance on big ships that we unload at the ports that are congested, that are often under fire in this conflict and sometimes closed. We're looking at a situation where maybe we won't be able to use Hodeida port again and for the foreseeable future. Then we'll have to move to smaller ports where there's no infrastructure to offload or warehouses and no ability to even support those huge ships that we need to take in. So it's a very challenging situation.
And a bitter war being played out. We won't argue whether it's a proxy war or who's fighting whom. Suffice to say, are your aid workers under threat, literally in threat of their lives, as they go about their job of trying to put food in people's mouths?
Well, we talk all the time about the shrinking humanitarian space, and that is very much what we're facing in a country like Yemen. The space that we, as humanitarian agencies, have to operate in is shrinking much, much smaller. The risks are so much greater when there are bombardments from the air, when there's heavy artillery used, where there are checkpoints with armed men on the roads. These are all the kind of obstacles that we have to navigate on a day-to-day basis. And there are moments when we have to say, no, it's too risky, our staff cannot go there. And when we have to say that, it means that people are not going to get the assistance that we want to deliver.
And when you make that argument to say to the warring parties, to leaders, if you can communicate with them of either side, do they have no sympathy that the citizens, the civilians, or even members of those people are fighting, presumably, are short of food?
I think it depends who you're talking to, but that sympathy seems to have evaporated to a certain extent in these countries where conflict is so bitter. And at the same time, you have to ask yourself, is there that residue of respect for the humanitarian organisations that we've had in the past? We're asking ourselves whether that has been undermined to a certain extent as well, and whether we have the freedom of movement that we used to have, where we could operate without threat. Unfortunately, today it seems very different.
And if we look at the picture across these African nations affected by it, I understand the geography of it, I understand the global warming argument, but again, it's conflict, is it not, that really is your main challenge you face in trying to get regular citizens enough food?
That is the common thread that we see across all of these areas where famine has either been declared, as it has in South Sudan, where we think it may have taken place, as the situation in northeastern Nigeria, and where we think it might be declared in Somalia if action isn't taken. Conflict is a game changer as far as humanitarian intervention is concerned. All the rules change once conflict is there. And just to illustrate this, if we take another country from that region, Ethiopia, last year suffering the impact of El Nino, no conflict, government coordinating closely with international aid agencies, 10 million people needing food assistance, job done, no famine declared. That is the difference. If you can remove conflict from the equation, you can get on and do your work.
And it's not, Greg, contrary to maybe some people's views, it's not that the world is being ungenerous. I mean, there are trillions of dollars in aid led by America, given to organisations like yours and doing similar work around the world each calendar year. Why is that money not going where it's most needed? Why do you need another $4 billion?
I would argue it is going where it's needed, but the scale of the need at the moment is just so huge that the resources are not sufficient to meet what is needed on the ground. And let's not forget that at the very moment where we are facing the prospect of famine in 4 countries, we are still at the same time doing the day-to-day job of responding to the longest running, most complex and most challenging emergency in the world, which is Syria and neighbouring countries.
Right.
The international system is literally stretched to its very limits.
Is Syria sucking in aid money and aid sympathy and aid generosity, do you think?
A lot of money is going to Syria. I think it's unfair to say it's sucking it in because that makes it seem as if it's not really needed. It is needed there. But the system globally perhaps doesn't have the capacity to respond to so many complex, costly, dangerous emergencies all at the same time.
And I know it's an old problem of donor fatigue, but in today's world where there are politicians saying, actually, let's fix life at home, we've got other things to worry about, we've got international terrorism to worry about, is it increasingly difficult to make the argument to governments to say, actually, we need to help our neighbours in this country and this country who are less fortunate than us?
I think it is getting more difficult, but most difficult of all, and this has always been the case in my experience, is making the argument that if we see a problem on the horizon and we intervene early, it will cost less, more lives will be saved, and disaster will be averted. And that could have been the case in all of these situations that we're talking about today. That is the argument that we need to win, and we need to redouble our efforts as those who are advocating on behalf of hungry people and people in need of assistance, that early intervention is absolutely the best way to go about it.
Greg Barrow, thank you very much indeed. This is Insight. Coming next, the EU threatens to fine member states over dangerous levels of air pollution.